The quiet stranger in leather. The air in Beverly Hills that morning was crisp. The sky painted with soft shades of blue as sunlight streamed through towering palm trees lining the boulevard. People in designer suits and sunglasses sipped overpriced coffee, checking their watches and phones, rushing from meeting to meeting. Sleek cars purred down the road and the sidewalks shimmered under the glare of the sun. Tucked on a corner of Rodeo Drive was an exclusive showroom, Valkyrie Motors. This was no ordinary motorcycle store. It was where the richest of the rich came to order one-of-a-kind machines. Handcrafted, futuristic. Some of them cost more than a mansion. Inside, the scent of polished chrome and leather hung in the air, blending with the sound of classical music drifting softly from hidden speakers. Inside the showroom, a young man named Trevor leaned against the service desk. He had slicked back blonde hair, a spotless white shirt, and a permanent smirk that suggested he didn't think highly of anyone who didn't show up in a Lamborghini. Beside him, another employee named Marla scrolled through her phone, barely, glancing up as customers walked in and out. They had seen it all. Princes from Dubai, pop stars with entourages, tech billionaires throwing down six figures without blinking. They were used to power, and they had grown arrogant. Just before noon, the large glass doors swung open and a man stepped inside. He wasn't flashy. He didn't have an assistant or a photographer trailing him. He wore worn-out jeans, a black leather jacket, and a helmet under one arm. His dark hair was tied back and there were soft lines around his eyes. At first, no one recognized him. He didn't act famous. He didn't walk like someone who wanted attention. He walked like someone who just loved motorcycles. Trevor glanced at him, then looked away. Marla didn't even lift her eyes. The man walked slowly between the machines, his fingers brushing lightly over the tanks and handlebars as if each one had a story. He paused in front of a red custom build with gold accents and nodded to himself. It was beautiful, but it wasn't the flash that caught his eye. It was the balance, the curves, the soul in its design. After a few minutes, he approached the front desk. Trevor looked up lazily and asked, "Can I help you?" The man gave a small, polite smile. "I was wondering if I could speak to someone about a custom build." Trevor raised an eyebrow. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," the man said. "I didn't know I needed one." Marla laughed quietly, not even looking up. "Yeah, you kinda do," she muttered. The man didn't argue. He just stood there patiently, still holding his helmet, eyes gentle, voice calm. "I understand. I can wait." Trevor studied him with growing irritation. The guy didn't look rich. He didn't have a Rolex or designer shoes. His jacket had a tear near the sleeve. "Listen," Trevor said. "These bikes aren't for just anyone. They're built for people who, let's say, move in certain circles." The man tilted his head. "I see. I just thought maybe someone could talk to me about what's possible. I've worked on bikes before. I love the craft." "Sure you do," Marla snapped, finally looking up. "Let me guess. You rebuilt a Harley in your garage with duct tape and dreams. That's cute." Trevor laughed loudly at that, enjoying the jab. "Yeah, and maybe next week Elon Musk will walk in wearing flip-flops." The man didn't flinch. He didn't defend himself or raise his voice. He simply looked at the bikes, behind them again, as if their beauty mattered more than their mockery. He nodded once, then turned to leave. As he reached the door, something strange happened. A customer who had just entered, a tall man in a black suit, froze mid-step. He stared at the man walking out, his mouth opened slightly in shock. "Wait, was that?" The woman beside him gasped. "Oh my God, that's Keanu Reeves." In seconds, whispers filled the showroom. People turned to stare. Someone pulled out a phone, fumbling to take a picture. Trevor and Marla looked up, confused. They glanced at the security footage playing behind the counter and then looked at each other, their faces going pale. "No way," Marla whispered. That was him? Keanu Reeves, a global icon, an actor known not just for his films but for his kindness, his generosity, his humility. He had been on magazine covers, on movie screens across the world, and yet they had mocked him like he was nobody. The door was still swinging slightly as if embarrassed by what had happened. Trevor ran out calling his name. "Mr. Reeves, wait, please." But Keanu was already walking down the street, his head low, not looking back. He didn't seem angry. He didn't even seem hurt. He just seemed disappointed, like he had seen this kind of thing too many times before, people judging by clothes, by money, by image, people forgetting the importance of respect. Inside the showroom, a heavy silence fell. Marla looked sick. "We just insulted Keanu Reeves," she said, almost in a whisper. In front of customers, in front of security cameras, another employee, who had just come in, looked around in disbelief. "You told Keanu Reeves he wasn't good enough to buy a bike here?" Trevor sank into his chair, face flushed, hands shaking. "He didn't say who he was. He didn't act like... He didn't even, but excuses didn't matter now. The damage had been done. People were already tweeting about it. Videos were being uploaded. Headlines would follow. The world loved Keanu, and the world hated arrogance. What they didn't know, what none of them could have known, was that Keanu hadn't just come to buy a bike. He had come with a plan. A quiet one. A generous one. He had recently partnered with a team of engineers and artists to create something new, a secret project that blended technology, art, and passion into the future of motorcycles. He had come looking for collaborators, for dreamers, for people who respected the craft, not just the price tag. Valkyrie Motors had been on his list. But now things were about to change in ways no one could predict. Because behind his soft eyes and calm voice, Keanu had something else. A memory. A lesson he had learned over and over. That humility was a strength, not a weakness. That those who judged others too quickly often missed the miracle standing in front of them. And that sometimes silence was the loudest answer. As the showroom lights gleamed across untouched chrome and whispers spread across the city like wildfire, something stirred behind Keanu's eyes. This wasn't over. Not even close. The ripple that shook Rodeo Drive. The night had settled over Los Angeles like a velvet curtain, hiding the sun, but not the echo of what had happened that day. Across social media, the name Keanu Reeves was burning brighter than ever. But this time it wasn't for a new film or an award. It was for something deeper, something that reached into people's hearts and reminded them of a truth often forgotten in a world obsessed with image and status. Someone had tried to humiliate him. And instead of fighting back, he walked away, with dignity, with silence, with grace. And that silence spoke louder than any revenge. In the hours after Keanu left the store, the video had already made it to millions. A tourist from Ohio had captured the moment on her phone, including the entire interaction with Trevor and Marla. The clip was shaky, but the audio was clear. Keanu's calm voice, Trevor's arrogant laughter, Marla's biting sarcasm. It was all there. The internet didn't take long to respond. Hashtags began trending. Respect Keanu. Never judge a book. Valkyrie Motor Shame. The comments were a tidal wave of outrage, sympathy, and admiration. People from every corner of the world were defending Keanu, telling their own stories of being underestimated, being looked down on, being told they weren't enough. Meanwhile, in a quiet studio just outside downtown Los Angeles, Keanu stood alone looking at a half-finished motorcycle frame. It was different from anything on the market, a blend of classic soul and futuristic design, a machine that didn't just move fast, but told a story with every curve. Beside it were blueprints and sketches, handwritten notes pinned to the walls, coffee cups left behind from long nights of work. This place wasn't about fame, it was about passion. And the people he worked with here understood that better than anyone. His partner in the project, an old friend named Silas, walked in holding a tablet. His hair was wild, his glasses crooked, and his hands covered in grease. "You've seen the video?" he asked quietly. Keanu nodded without looking up. "Yeah." Silas hesitated, then placed the tablet on the workbench. "You want to say something? Go public?" Keanu took a deep breath and wiped his hands on a TKI rag. "No. I don't need to explain myself." Silas nodded slowly. He understood. They had known each other for years. Silas had been a street mechanic once, fixing bikes in the back alley of a music store. Now he was helping design the future of motorcycles. And that was only because Keanu had walked into his life, not as a celebrity, but as a friend who saw potential when no one else did. "But I want to do something else," Keanu said after a pause, his voice steady. Silas raised an eyebrow. "What?" Keanu looked up and there was something sharp in his eyes, not anger but intention. "I want to build a space, not just a store, not just a showroom. A place where real people, real builders, real dreamers can come together. Where no one's turned away for wearing the wrong jacket or not having the right car keys. A place where the soul of the machine matters more than the suit behind the wallet." Silas smiled slowly. "You mean a rebellion?" Keanu chuckled softly. "No, I mean a reminder." And that's how it started, not with vengeance but with vision. Over the next few weeks, while the headlines continued to buzz and Valkyrie Motors scrambled to save face with press releases and apologies, Keanu and Silas began gathering. Their team. Welders, engineers, artists, and storytellers. People who had once been rejected, overlooked, or underestimated. One by one, they joined the cause. Not for fame, not for profit, but because they believed in something deeper, in building not just machines, but meaning. Meanwhile, Trevor and Marla were in chaos. Corporate had launched an internal investigation. Clients were canceling appointments. Influencers who once bragged about shopping there were now deleting their posts. Reviews were pouring in, filled with disappointment and rage. Marla had been suspended indefinitely and Trevor was hanging by a thread. Every morning he woke up with a knot in his chest, haunted by the moment he laughed in the face of the one man who had the power to change everything, and did so without lifting a finger. But the biggest surprise was still coming, because just 3 blocks away from Valkyrie Motors, a new space had begun to take shape. It was quiet at first. No press release, no announcement. Just a large warehouse being renovated under the radar. The workers moved in silence, the windows covered, the name of the project kept secret. But whispers began to spread. Someone had seen Keanu's motorcycle parked out front. Someone else noticed Silas coming and going late at night. A few workers mentioned designs they'd never seen before. Bikes that looked like something out of a dream. Light but strong, graceful yet powerful. And then, one morning, without warning, the warehouse doors opened. A simple sign stood above the entrance. The Forge. The name wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But it carried weight. It spoke to creation, to heat and hammer, to building something with your own hands. And when people stepped inside, they found something unlike anything else. It wasn't a showroom. It was an experience. Bikes lined the walls, each with a tag that told its story. Who built it, why, what it meant to them. There was a community table in the center, made from salvaged wood where guests could sit and talk, share ideas, sketch dreams. There were workshops in the back, open to the public, where you could learn, build, or just watch. Keanu didn't stand at the front like a king. He moved quietly among the people, helping a teenager tighten bolts, discussing gear ratios with a retired engineer, listening to the dreams of a young woman who had always wanted to build her own chopper but never had the chance. And somehow this quiet presence drew more attention than any red carpet. Soon the story began to shift. Blogs started writing about the Forge. Then newspapers, then TV shows. Everyone wanted to know what it was, how it came to be, and why Keanu had chosen to launch it just a few blocks from the store that had humiliated him, but he never answered with anger. When a reporter asked him if it was revenge, he only smiled and said, "No, it's a message, and maybe a mirror." One day, a young man walked into the Forge holding a folder. His hands were shaking. He was dressed in clothes that didn't fit, and his shoes were torn, but his eyes burned with something fierce. He had sketches, designs he had been working on since he was 12. For years he had been laughed at, turned away, told he'd never make it. But he had seen the video. He had seen what Keanu had built, and now He stood at the table, too nervous to speak. Keanu walked over, smiled gently, and sat beside him. "Can I see them?" The young man opened the folder. Silence fell, and as Keanu flipped through the pages, something changed in the air. These weren't just ideas. They were possibilities. Keanu looked up and nodded. "Let's build it," he said. Outside, the sun poured down on the forge, and in the distance the windows of Valkyrie Motors reflected the light, cold and untouched. A storm was coming, but not the kind that breaks things, the kind that changes them forever. A heart. Behind the engine a month passed. The city kept spinning as it always had. Bright lights flashing on billboards, cars rushing through intersections, helicopters humming overhead like mechanical insects. But something quiet had shifted deep beneath the noise. Word of the forge had spread beyond Los Angeles. It became more than a workshop, more than a story of kindness answered with creativity. It had become a symbol. In Detroit, a girl who built bikes with her grandfather started a blog called Wrenched Dreams after visiting the forge. In Tokyo, a custom builder sent blueprints as a thank you gift, calling Keanu the soul writer. In Brazil, an orphanage received enough donations to build a vocational program after someone shared a story of how Keanu taught a teenager to shape steel. None of this had been planned. None of it had been advertised. It was the ripple of one quiet act of dignity, moving through people who needed to believe the world still had decency in it. Keanu never made speeches. He never took credit. He showed, up early and stayed late, always with his hands in the grease. He rode his bike through the alley behind the forge, arriving like a shadow and leaving like the wind. People came not to meet the celebrity, but to build beside the man. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions. He knelt down to hold a wheel steady for a girl half his age trying to attach a side panel she'd made herself. The forge wasn't about noise. It was about heart. It was a fire kept alive by humility. But as the forge rose in influence and admiration, Valkyrie Motors began to crack. Their reputation had once been untouchable. People used to brag about being waitlisted for their machines. But now, silence filled the showroom. The once proud space felt hollow. Every inquiry they received came with a hesitation. Even the wealthy didn't want to be seen supporting a place stained by arrogance. Their social media manager had resigned. Their bookings dropped by 70%. Partnerships backed out one by one. Trevor had been demoted and relocated to the back office. Marla never returned. And though corporate tried every kind of spin, they could not undo what millions had seen with their own eyes. Two smug employees mocking a humble man who turned out to be more than they deserved. Still, Keanu didn't speak their name. Not once. Even when reporters asked about the incident, he'd say, "It was a moment. Let's build something better." That was all. And the silence burned hotter than fire. Then something happened that no one expected. It was a Saturday afternoon when an old man walked into the forge. He wore a brown coat, buttoned all the way up despite the heat, and carried a leather bag with patches sewn into the seams. He had a limp, and his hands shook slightly, but there was something steady in his eyes. He didn't say much when he arrived. Just nodded politely, asked if he could look around, and was given a small tour by Silas. But the moment Keanu saw him, he froze. He walked over slowly. His voice was soft. "Mr. Hayden?" The old man turned. His smile was weathered and warm. "You still remember?" "Of course," Keanu said, almost in a whisper. "You taught me to weld." Mr. Hayden chuckled. "You had shaky hands back then, always second-guessing your sparks. But you had the heart. That's what matters. The heart behind the engine." It turned out the old man was the one who had first taught Keanu about bikes. Decades ago, in a dusty shop behind a gas station, when Keanu was still trying to understand who he was and where he belonged, he had wandered in one day, curious about a strange sound coming from behind the station, and found Mr. Hayden hammering a piece of bent steel into shape. That summer, the old man had shown him everything. How to strip down an engine, how to read a machine like a map, how to treat every part with respect. And more than that, he had taught him about life, about showing up with kindness, about not judging a man by his clothes, about fixing things with your hands instead of breaking them with your words. Mr. Hayden looked around the forge and smiled slowly. This place, this is what I always hoped you'd build. Keanu's throat tightened. He didn't have words for what that meant. He just nodded, and in that quiet nod was a lifetime of gratitude. What neither of them knew was that a girl named Juno was standing nearby. She had been at the forge for just a week, a runaway with a scar down her cheek and grease under her nails. No one asked where she came from. They just welcomed her. And now, hearing this exchange, she blinked, hard trying not to cry, because for the first time in her life she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she wasn't broken, like maybe she could build more than bikes. Maybe she could build herself. That night, Keanu sat by the workbench, sketching out the final phase of the forge. He had an idea, something that went beyond the city, beyond the shop. He wanted to launch a mobile forge, trucks outfitted with portable workshops that could travel across the country, teaching kids in forgotten towns, giving ex-convicts a second chance, helping veterans find a way to heal through creation. It was ambitious, it would need funding. But he didn't care. He'd sell every bike he owned to make it happen if he had to. As he leaned over the blueprint, Silas walked in and placed a letter in front of him. "This came for you," he said. Keanu opened it. Inside was a single page, typed, formal, and cold, to Mr. Keanu Reeves. Valkyrie Motors would like to request a meeting to discuss a potential partnership. We believe your recent success could be amplified through our global brand and network. We are open to providing funding, resources, and a shared platform for the forge. Keanu read it twice. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply placed the letter back on the bench, looked at Silas, and said, "They still don't get it." "What do you want to do?" Silas asked. Keanu thought for a moment. Then he said, "I want to invite them here, not to negotiate, not to talk business. I want them to feel what we're building, not with contracts, with truth." 2 days later, Trevor walked through the doors of the forge, flanked by a new manager and a legal advisor. He looked thinner. His confidence was cracked. He was clearly uncomfortable, eyes darting around, seeing people laughing, working, sharing, ideas without pretense. Silas welcomed them politely. He brought them to the back where Keanu was fitting a carbon fiber frame into a prototype. Keanu didn't stand up. He didn't shake hands. He just looked up briefly and said, "You came?" Trevor cleared his throat. "Yes. We're here to explore ways we might align." Keanu stood slowly, wiping his hands, and looked around the room. "You see, her?" He pointed at Juno, who was helping a visitor attach brake lines. "She was living on the street 3 weeks ago. Today she taught someone how to bleed a brake system." He pointed to an older man sanding a fuel tank. "He's a vet, used to be homeless. Now he's designing tanks that can survive high-impact crashes." He walked past them, motioning to a wall filled with handwritten letters. "These are from people around the world. Not rich people, not powerful people, just human beings, thanking us for making them feel seen." Then he turned to them and said, "You want to partner? Then leave your suits outside. Leave your titles. Bring your hands. Bring your humility. If you can't do that, there's no room here for the old world." They stood in silence. There was nothing to say, and then Keanu walked away. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what mattered, and, across the city, the quiet roar of a movement was beginning to rise. The world listens, but the heart decides. Dawn rolled in with a soft gold light spreading over the city. But this wasn't the same city anymore. Something intangible had shifted in Los Angeles. In its energy, its pace, even its silence. It was as if people had started to pause and pay closer attention, not to the flash of cameras or the size of someone's wallet, but to the way people moved when no one was watching. And at the center of this quiet awakening was a man who had asked for none of it. Keanu Reeves had simply walked away from cruelty, and in doing so, awakened something far bigger than anger. He had awakened a hunger for authenticity. The Forge had become more than a workshop, it had become a pilgrimage. People came from Texas, from Poland, from the outskirts of India and the alleyways of Johannesburg. They didn't come for selfies or to stand next to Keanu. They came to build something, to remember something. And in the shared silence of that wide warehouse, among the soft hum of drills and the spark of welding torches, strangers became brothers and sisters. Men who had once been hardened by prison sentences now taught teenagers how to polish a frame. Women who had never held a wrench were suddenly shaping metal with their own hands. Every scar had a place. Every past had value. On the far side of the Forge, a small room had been transformed into what Silas jokingly called the map room. On the walls were hundreds of pins, each one marking a town, a city, a village where someone had sent a letter saying, "We want to build too." At first it was just the map of the US, then it grew. South America, Europe, Southeast Asia. The pins spread like stars. Each one represented a person or group inspired to create their own version of the Forge, their own safe space where dreams and machines could be built side by side. Keanu would walk in sometimes and just stand there, hands in his pockets, quietly taking it all in. He never smiled widely, never acted like a hero. But anyone watching him in that room knew something sacred had been born from that single moment of cruelty. But outside the Forge, the pressure was mounting. News stations wanted interviews. Magazines wanted exclusive profiles. Luxury brands that once ignored Keanu were now begging for endorsements. Documentaries were being pitched. One company offered millions for the film rights to The Forge story. Yet he declined them all. Not out of arrogance, but because something about the noise didn't sit right with him. This wasn't a product. This was a message, and it couldn't be sold. Still, not all attention was welcome. One afternoon, as the Forge buzzed with life and laughter, a black luxury sedan pulled up to the curb. Two men in dark suits stepped out. They weren't reporters. They weren't customers. They were representatives from a powerful European conglomerate known for owning some of the world's biggest automotive companies. They walked through the Forge with polished shoes and clinical expressions, and when they found Keanu, they didn't waste time. "We've studied what you've built here," the taller one said, handing him a folder. "We believe the Forge has the potential to become a global brand. We are offering you a multi-year contract. Funding, factories, marketing, will handle everything. You just keep being the face." Keanu didn't open the folder. He looked at the man, then out across the workshop. He saw Juno now leading a small class on electrical wiring. He saw Mr. Hayden asleep in a chair, hands resting on blueprints, peace in his face. He saw a boy, named Carlos, whose parents couldn't afford a bike, now working on a 3-wheel prototype for the elderly. These weren't brand assets. They were stories. And they weren't for sale. "You don't get it," he said softly. The men exchanged confused glances. "We're offering a future." Keanu smiled gently. "No. You're offering a cage. Gold-plated, but still a cage." And that was the end of the meeting. That night, Silas found Keanu sitting on the roof of the Forge, legs dangling over the edge, eyes scanning the quiet street below. He joined him without a word, handing him a thermos of coffee. They sat in silence for a while before Silas asked, "Are you sure you don't want to take any of these offers? We could expand faster." Keanu took a slow sip before answering. "I want to expand slower, deeper, not wider." Silas nodded. "Then we'll do it your way." They stayed there until the stars came out. Two friends bound by grease, dreams, and quiet fire. Days later, something unexpected arrived. A letter. Handwritten, wrapped in cloth. It came from a small town in southern Japan. It was from a young woman named Aya. Her father had once been a revered motorcycle builder before an accident left him paralyzed. For years, he lost his will to create. But one night, Aya showed him a video from the Forge. She translated Keanu's words into Japanese. Her father wept. And then, with shaking hands, he began to sketch again. Aya's letter was a thank you, and enclosed with it was one of her father's drawings, a bike that looked like the wind itself. Soft curves, organic shapes, a fusion of ancient craftsmanship and modern power. Keanu didn't speak when he saw it. He just held the paper as if it were made of glass. The next morning, he hung Aya's drawing on the wall of the forge in the heart of the building, where everyone could see it. Underneath it, he wrote a single sentence. "When you build with your heart, the world hears it." The forge began plans to bring Aya and her father to Los Angeles as guests of honor for the forge's first global gathering, an event where builders from around the world could meet, share, learn, and build together. But Keanu had one more idea, something that had lived in the back of his mind for months. It was time to take the forge beyond metal and machines. It was time to touch lives in another way, so he created a scholarship fund, not for elite schools or famous academies, but for forgotten towns and struggling families. It would pay for tools, training, and mentorship. The money came not from corporations but from the sales of the bikes built at the forge. Every customer knew that their purchase wasn't just buying a machine. It was building a future for someone else. And that changed everything. As the forge expanded its reach, Valkyrie Motors fell deeper into silence. Investors pulled out. Staff turnover reached record levels. The showroom was half empty most days. Trevor, once so proud and sharp-tongued, now worked quietly in a parts warehouse, rarely speaking, often staring at the ground. He had tried to contact Keanu, not for a partnership, but for a sincere apology. He had written a letter but couldn't bring himself to send it. It sat folded in his drawer, like a memory of who he could have been if he had made a different choice. But redemption has strange timing. One evening, long after the forge had closed, Keanu was cleaning up when he heard a knock on the back door. He opened it to find Trevor standing there, rain-soaked, eyes red. Keanu didn't speak. Trevor held out the letter with shaking hands. "I know I don't deserve it, but I needed to say it. I was wrong. And I'm sorry." Keanu took the letter, read it, folded it back, then stepped aside. "Come in," he said. And in that moment, something bigger than engines or egos passed between them. It was forgiveness. The kind that doesn't erase the past, but transforms it. And in the heart of Los Angeles, as stars pierced through the clouds, the forge remained lit, not just by fire, but by grace. When the fire dimmed, the forge had become more than a building. It was breathing now. It had its own heartbeat. People who entered walked slower, spoke softer, and listened more. It wasn't about motorcycles anymore, not really. It was about identity. About second chances, about the feeling of being seen for the first time. The walls held stories in every scratch, every stain, every weld line. The team had grown into a family, drawn not by resumes or referrals, but by pain, hope, and the courage to create. And at the center of it all, steady and quiet, was Keanu Reeves. No throne, no spotlight. Just hands that carried kindness like a blueprint, and eyes that carried years. The global summit was weeks away. The forge had planned to host builders and creators from over 20 countries. Aya and her father were due to arrive from Japan. A refugee mechanic from Syria had been granted special travel permissions. A mother and daughter duo from Argentina, who had built a solar-powered prototype from scrap metal, were preparing to unveil their invention. The team was nervous, excited, overworked, and more alive than they had ever been. Keanu and Silas stayed, deep into the nights, checking structural mounts, reviewing logistics, and sleeping in the forge office whenever they were too tired to drive home. Everything felt like a dream, on the edge of becoming real. But then the phone rang. It was just past midnight when Silas picked it up. Keanu was outside in the back lot helping Juno with a torque issue on her rear suspension. He saw Silas through the glass, and something in the way his friend stood completely still made his heart slow down. Silas hung up, walked outside, didn't speak for a long moment. "It's Mr. Hayden," he finally said. "He collapsed an hour ago. The hospital just called." The world didn't stop moving. Cars still drove by. Streetlights still hummed. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. But something inside Keanu went completely still, like an engine that suddenly ran out of fuel, the kind of stillness that makes your bones feel hollow. They rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. Mr. Hayden was gone. The man who had taught Keanu not only how to shape metal, but how to carry respect in every movement, had left the world with the same quiet grace he had lived it. There were no dramatic gasps, no final words, just the memory of years carved into hands that had once built greatness and now rested forever. Keanu didn't cry in front of anyone. He sat by the hospital bed after everyone had left and took the old man's hand in his. He whispered thank yous that came from the deepest parts of his soul, and then he sat in silence for hours, eyes closed, his mind drifting through old summers, oil-stained overalls. The first time he'd ever welded two parts into one and felt like he had created something that could last. When he finally returned to the forge, something in him had changed. He didn't talk much for the next few days. He worked harder than ever, but there was a distance in his gaze, a heaviness in the way he moved. People noticed, but no one asked. They gave him space, trying to carry more of the weight so he wouldn't have to, but grief is not something that can be carried for you. It lives inside the rib cage behind the sternum, in the quiet between breaths. And one night, when everyone had gone home, Keanu stood alone in the forge, staring at a half-built frame on the workbench. And for the first time since this all began, he felt doubt. Was he really making a difference? He thought about all the people who had walked through these doors, all the lives that had been touched, but he also thought about how fast time moved, how quickly moments disappeared. He had tried to honor the man who gave him his beginning, but he hadn't been there at the end. That thought tore into him like a blade. He picked up a wrench, then stopped. His hands trembled, and he realized something that shook him to the core. He was tired, not physically, not even emotionally, but tired in a way that went deeper. The kind of tired that builds over years of holding yourself to a silent standard, the kind of tired that whispers you're giving everything you have, but is it enough? That night he left the forge without finishing the frame. He rode into the hills, the wind cold against his skin, the darkness vast around him. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't want to think. He just wanted to feel something that would remind him he was still human. He ended up at the old gas station where he had first met Mr. Hayden all those years ago. It had been shut down for years, boarded windows, faded paint. But somehow in the moonlight it looked exactly the same, like time had held it in place for him to return. He walked around to the back. The small workshop was still there, rusted tools, cracked tiles, and on the wall, faint but still visible, were the words that Mr. Hayden had once written in chalk: "Build with love, or don't build at all." Keanu sat on the floor and closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he allowed the tears to come. Not loud, not dramatic, just slow, quiet, honest, the kind of tears that cleanse the spirit. The next morning, the team found him back at the forge. He didn't say much, but he rolled up his sleeves and started working, and when Juno came over to check on him, he looked at her with eyes that had cried but still burned with fire. "We finished the frame," he said, and together, they did. The summit approached quickly. Tickets had sold out in 37 minutes. Journalists were buzzing but were told there would be no press passes. This wasn't for headlines, it was for hearts. Keanu had decided that instead of cutting a ribbon or giving a speech, he would unveil something else. A tribute bike, designed in secret, using parts and sketches from Mr. Hayden's original concepts. It was the most personal build he had ever done. The day of the summit arrived. Hundreds of creators from across the world gathered inside and outside the forge. There were translators, welders, machinists, and even musicians. The event began not with music or fireworks, but with a bell, one soft chime signaling silence. Keanu stepped forward, holding his helmet, dressed not in a suit, but in the same torn jacket he had worn the day he was insulted at Valkyrie Motors. He spoke slowly. "We build not just machines, but meaning. We honor those who taught us, and we remember that no matter how loud the world becomes, the heart speaks quietly." He pulled the cover from the tribute bike. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Classic lines. A silent motor. Custom. Engravings of Mr. Hayden's chalk words inlaid across the frame. It didn't need applause. It just needed breath, and the crowd gave it. Not in cheers, but in silence. The kind of silence that says everything. And at the back of the room, unnoticed by most, stood Trevor, now dressed in a forge apron, helping new attendees learn the basics of handling tools. He wiped his eyes. He had never known a silence could heal like that. The road never ends. The summit ended not with applause, but with something far more rare, stillness. It was the kind of stillness that fills the air after something sacred has been spoken, where no one dares to break the moment, where silence is no longer absence, but presence. The forge had done more than host an event. It had become a mirror, held up to a noisy world, quietly reminding it of what truly matters. Creation, compassion, and connection. When the attendees left, they didn't just leave with souvenirs or photos. They left with calloused fingers, new friendships, and a fire in their hearts. They returned to their countries and started their own small workshops, not to copy the forge, but to echo its soul. In Mexico City, a group of teenagers opened La Chispa, a community bike shop for kids who had nowhere to go after school. In rural India, a disabled woman who had once dreamed of engineering began teaching young girls how to shape metal. In the Yao, Scottish Highlands, a veteran rebuilt an abandoned barn and turned it into a healing space for men dealing with trauma, and every one of them in some way traced their first step back to the forge, and to the man who never called himself a leader but led anyway. Keanu never chased the spotlight, but the spotlight kept chasing him. It was no longer just about what had happened at Valkyrie Motors. That moment had become a seed, and now the branches had reached around the globe. Journalists who had once doubted the story's power now wrote pieces with titles like The Quiet Revolution, Grease, Grit, and Grace, and how one man's silence saved 1,000 dreams. But even as his influence grew, Keanu remained unchanged. Every morning he arrived early. Every evening he stayed late. When a 12-year-old boy asked for help tuning his first engine, Keanu knelt beside him, smiled gently, and said, "Let's do it together." Still, something inside him knew the time was coming to hand over the forge. Not abandon it, but release it. The forge didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to everyone it had touched. He started stepping back slowly, giving Silas more responsibility, allowing Juno to lead workshops, letting the community grow without his shadow always present. He believed in them, and more importantly, he wanted them to believe in themselves. Then one evening, just after sunset, an envelope arrived at the forge. It was unmarked, handwritten, sealed with red wax. Keanu opened it alone in the office. Inside was a simple note. "You don't know me, but you changed my life. I was one of those people, the kind who judged too fast, laughed too loud, lived too shallow. I was at Valkyrie Motors the day they mocked you. I didn't say anything. I just stood there and watched. I've thought about that moment every day since, but I never found the courage to speak. Now I have. Not to be forgiven, but to say thank you. Because I saw you walk away, and in that moment, I saw what a real man looks like. You didn't need revenge. You had something stronger. Dignity." The letter wasn't signed. There was no return address, just those words, written with trembling honesty. Keanu read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in the same drawer where he kept Mr. Hayden's chalk and Aya's first drawing. That night, he walked out to the forge floor where the lights had dimmed and only the sound of tools being packed up filled the air. Silas was sweeping. Juno was laughing with a new batch of students. Trevor was loading up a shipment of parts. Keanu looked around. This wasn't a project anymore. This was a legacy. The next day, he gathered the team. They all stood in a circle, surrounded by half-built bikes and open notebooks. The forge was alive, and buzzing as always, but something about Keanu's voice made everyone go quiet when he spoke. "I started this place because I believed in something simple," he said. that the way we treat each other matters more than anything we build. And I believe that even more today. But this place, it's not mine now. It's yours. It belongs to the people who walk in with dirt on their boots and fire in their hearts. It belongs to the girl who welds like she's writing poetry. It belongs to the guy who's been through hell and just wants a place to be useful again. It belongs to all of you. He looked at Silas, then at Juno. And that's why I'm stepping back. Gasps filled the room. Some protested. Some went silent. Even Juno's eyes went wide. But Keanu raised a hand gently. I'm not leaving, he said. I'm just making space for more voices, for more leaders, for the next generation of builders who don't need me to hold the wrench anymore. They understood. Not immediately, not easily, but they understood. Because true leaders don't cling, they lift. In the weeks that followed, the forge didn't shrink without him. It expanded. Juno launched a mentorship program. Silas partnered with a nonprofit to take mobile forges into underserved communities. Trevor became a certified instructor, teaching new hires not just technical skills, but how to treat people with grace. And every year on the anniversary of the summit, people gathered from across the world to honor the story that had started with a man who had been humiliated and responded with hope. Keanu spent his days writing, not aimlessly, but with intention. Sometimes, he visited the new forges in other countries. Sometimes he returned to the old gas station, cleaned the dust from the windows, and sat alone in the workshop where it all began. And sometimes, without announcing it, without anyone noticing at first, he would return to the forge in Los Angeles. He'd slip in, help a kid adjust a gear ratio, or bring lunch for the crew. He never asked for attention, never stood on a stage, but the room always felt different when he was there. Warmer, more grounded, like the foundation had returned. One evening years later, a young woman walked into the forge for the first time. She had oil on her jeans, a notebook in her hand, and nerves in her voice. Juno greeted her, gave her a tour, and offered her a station to work. The girl looked around, eyes wide. This place, she whispered. It's not what I expected. Juno smiled. Nothing worth remembering ever is. The girl paused, then asked, Is it true that this all started because someone insulted a man, and he didn't fight back? Juno nodded. It's true. The girl blinked slowly. What happened? To him? Juno looked out the window where the sunset was casting a soft orange glow across the alley. Then she said, He's still out there. Riding. Listening. Building in ways the world may never see. But every bolt we tighten, every frame we shape, every soul we welcome here, that's him. He never really left, and he never needed to stay. The girl smiled, picked up her tools, and began to build. And somewhere down an open road, far from headlines and handshakes, a black motorcycle cut through the wind, carrying a man with quiet eyes and calloused hands, still chasing the beauty of what could be created when the heart leads the way. Because the road never ends, and neither does grace.